Hi Alejandro, welcome back.
Thank you very much for having me back.
Yeah, and what I did, I took a brief look at the jPOS. I was just interested what it is, and it sounds like it's huge. So it was downloaded million times. It is used by Mastercard and many companies, and we already briefly talked how it started. But what's your architectural idea? So if you started to work, or to start to working on jPOS, what was the most important thing from the beginning? I mean, as an example, so in some projects, the architects are proud of modularization, decoupling, and replaceability of implementation. So, what was your goal or vision for jPOS?
Well, actually, the most important thing that we try to solve is to being able to handle large loads and being able to make changes on the fly with a system working 7/24. Because when you are running on a card issuer or a card acquirer, you can't afford to be 1 minute down, and sometimes you need to make changes on the fly. So the whole jPOS architecture and the Q2 JMX microkernel that we use is intended to be able to start and stop new servers or new clients on the fly and make changes on the fly. Another thing that we need to deal with is the heavy load and remote system failures, because you have systems connected to 1,000 different networks, and when one network is down, you need to be able to move that load to another system without affecting the rest of the system. Think of circuit breaking 20 years ago. We had to solve that kind of things that right now are probably better solved by new systems, but we had to solve those 20 years ago in order to deal with that kind of load.
And okay, so now we should clarify where jPOS is usually running. So on what CPUs, machines, operating systems, or where it is deployed?
Everywhere. We have systems running in mainframes, systems running in Sun, Solaris, all systems that kind of minis. But most of the time, it's running on Linux, and we have also systems running in Windows. It depends on the customer. jPOS is used in all steps of the POS and ATM transactions. So we have, for example, there are 20,000 ATMs in Brazil running jPOS inside the ATM, but then the server handles that load, and they use a mainframe for that. But jPOS runs on POS devices. jPOS runs on the large merchants that have to acquire POS credit card and debit card transactions, and also in acquirers and card issuers. So it's depending on the system. It's the architecture they use.
So you are providing both. So you're providing the server and the client, right?
Yes, the server, the client, the multiplexers, and the load balancers. And then on top of that, because jPOS is an implementation of the ISO 8583 standard, we are now working in the ISO 20022 standard. That's the core of the system. But on top of that, we have to implement systems using business logic. For example, we have to implement, imagine a debit card or a credit card. You have to deal with the balances of the cardholders, and you need to deal with velocity checks and business logics and and fees and things like that. So we built those components in what we call jPOS EE, jPOS Extended Edition, and it's also an open source project, and it's a set of reusable modules that you can combine in order to build a payment platform. Can be issuer or acquirer.
Mm-hmm.
So we build a lot of stuff.
So what you really implemented in Java is backend, load balancer, then the clients, and what is a multiplexer?
Well, imagine you have imagine you are a merchant and you have branches, and all the branches have terminals or the cash registers. So the cash registers connect with the server that connect to the your central server, and your central server connect to Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover, X. And you in the ISO 8583 world, you usually establish long-lived socket connections that you need to keep alive. So it's not like HTTP that you connect and you have one request per socket connection. Eventually, you can keep alive the HTTP. But this is a very old protocol built in the 80s and intended to be used over listed lines and X25 links. So everything is static and long-lived, and you establish a socket connection, you exchange keys over the wire, and then you regularly send echo messages and logon messages and things like that. So you need to multiplex that link over your 1,000 terminals that you might have.
Oh. They're almost like a UDP, but reliable, right?
It's on top. It works on top of TCP, but yes, it's like UDP, and you need to multiplex that, and you need to reconnect if the link goes down, and you even have in the past we even had issues with the TCP/IP MTU because you need to make sure that a single ISO 8583 packet goes in a single TCP/IP packet for legacy requirements in some very old satellite links and things like that. So we deal with all that low-level stuff as well as the high-level stuff to build the whole application.
So for me, it sounds like almost like a payment cloud, what you build. Well,
yes, we in our last system we're calling it the Payment Platform, and we're joining together our issuer system, which is called JCard, and the acquirer system, it's called JPTS, jPOS Transaction Switch, and we are starting to call it the TPP, the Payment Platform. So yes, that's what we try to build.
Do you know Mr. Bela Ban?
Oh, sure. I exchange emails with Bela all the time from J Groups. I follow with him. We use J Groups for some of our early clustering stuff, and it's. I'm really impressed with the project he started, more or less at the same time I started jPOS.
Yeah. I also had a chat with him. This was the episode 72 about J groups, and he's really nice guy. It was an excellent discussion, and what he also likes, no dependencies and KISS. So we had an interesting discussion about design principles, how he designed J groups. So it was really interesting. So, and by the way, after our last discussion, what I wanted to tell you this. What you remember me is, you know, also Daniel Knuth, right? He created Tech.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
He also spent the entire time writing code for the Tech and wanted to make it perfect. And you also told me, you spent the entire time rewriting jPOS to make it better and better. And I was fascinated by that because, if you have your own system, and you can just make it. It is a complete different world, right? Because usually in projects there is more marketing, politics, and whatever. And if you can spend time, on a system and make it better and better over time, it is I would say, a unique opportunity and a great feeling, I would say, right? Because you remember even code from back then. It's like, oh, I remember if I wrote it, 20 years ago, whatever, it was nice time. So it was like a piece of, almost like a Rolling Stones, So like a band moves from back then to now, and they still have fun playing, and you still have fun programming, right?
Absolutely. The only thing is I don't want to set a final version number after my death, like Mr. Nuth did for LaTeX, for text, because I think it's going to be 3.14, right?
I don't even know, but I know his philosophy was similar, right? So
Yeah.
And
that's great. Regarding the dependencies, it's very tough to add a new dependency to an open source project, because you have to maintain it 10 years, 15 years later, and it's a very strong bet to add a new dependency. And you need to follow the mailing list. For example, I used JGroups as a dependency in jPOS EE in some modules. It's not required for jPOS. And I participated in the JGroups mailing list. I exchanged conversations with Bela Ban. You need to be that involved in order to use a dependency. I see sometimes that people tend to use stuff just because it's there, without actually following the community of each of your dependencies. I use jdom, for example. jdom is
okay, remember. It was very popular, right? So,
it was very popular, and it is still working, and it has updates. It has a slow down, but I'm in touch with at least I'm participating in the mailing list. You need to be very involved in each dependency. So when you have a project with 100 dependencies, you'd need at least to have one individual following everything related to that dependency, CVEs and things like that.
I'm absolutely with you on that. So I spend the time less in products and more in projects. And what I see, just the external consultants just pick their dependencies because it's fun. And even, they pick a programming language on top of JVM, which from my perspective, if you think in terms of 10, 15 years, I cannot remember a programming language which actually survived, right? Because if you think in 15 years, so Java survived, but I think everything became, the most successful one, even Ruby, right, is less successful right now. Groovy, I would say, a little bit less successful right now. Scala as well, less successful. Now is Kotlin on the horizon, but who knows what happens in 10 years. And the problem is Java becomes better and better over time. So, it is harder and harder for the JVM languages to provide added value if you have Java 17, 18, or 19. So this is the next problem. And for me, the dependencies, they come with a price tag. And as you said, what I demand from in projects is that at least, in every sprint or whatever cycle you have to update all the dependencies. This is the price. So, and if it breaks, you have to fix it or remove it. And because it's painful, I try to avoid the dependencies. So this is why I like microprofile on Java EE, because the dependencies are not my problem. They are maintained by the runtime, and we have a deal usually with the runtime provider. I say, look, you patch the dependencies. I focus on business logic. This is what worked actually pretty well, especially if the dependencies are boring, because in one point of time they are just mature. So dependency injections, so I don't expect any problems. And also, I just prefer to use built-in Java SE stuff like Java utilogger or Java system logger, and even minor things like properties over external parsers or whatever. And And not only I don't have to maintain the external dependencies. What I also like is I don't have to learn them, right? Because if you learn Java once, so you get better and better remembering things, and you don't have to learn 100 external frameworks which change at any time.
I fully agree. I see a trend to use to use dependencies for no reason. For example, I the other day I had to reject a pull request that added string utils to a project because the developer
No, blank
had to,
is empty. Yeah.
Exactly. They had to use a substring, but hey, you get substring in a string in Java, and you get things like that. Conversions, base 24, 64 conversions, things like that.
Classic. Jakarta Commons lang, Jakarta Commons collections, classic. Just empty or not, and Jakarta Commons configuration. This is less common right now, but it was used instead of dependency injection, what the server already did. It's like, why are you doing this? This is interesting, the mindset, but because I think it becomes boring, if you just use Java, it's okay, boring, I would like to have something fresh. But what I tend to do is to have a side project, which is exciting, so you can put whatever you like, but the mission critical projects, I try to make them boring and write simple code.
That's I fully agree. I'm not a lot sold into dependency injection. I use it, but I don't really fully like it in some situations, because sometimes, unless you are talking about really well-established standards, you basically created some kind of DSL with the way you use the injections. So when you read a Java class, you need to go and read what the injection does in this or that particular case. Mm-hmm. So, and I think that for some reason in Java 1, if you remember C++, you could have a C .c file with several classes defined in the same file. So when I first came into Java 1.0 and 1.02, I found the constraint of not having multiple classes in the same file, some kind of limitation, and same as multiple inheritance. But in the long run, it's really great, because if you are looking for a class that says it's called ISO message, you go to the ISO message.java and you find that file. In C++, that file could be you need to grep or ACK the whole file system in order to figure out where that file is. And with annotations, sometimes you end up you know the file, but then you have this custom annotation, and you need to go figure out what the annotation does.
Mm-hmm. It depends. I give you an example. So in my current projects, if we have something like Quarkus or Payara or Helidon, microprofile runtimes, they are already there. So it means the dependency injection is available. Add inject and you are done. What I'm not using, or we are not using at all. So in my current project, I don't think we have a single interface. So we are just injecting classes, and we say, okay, the public interface, the public methods are the interface, and package private is package private is like private. And then with injection, it is less code, so you can easier unit test that. And with Quarkus, there is no downside, because there's no reflection. The bytecode is pre-generated, so it's crazy fast. So in the same project, so we use some AWS Lambdas, which are asynchronous. And they are consuming JSON events. So what it means is I could use Quarkus, but I don't have to, because there is no inherent added value. So if I would use let's say Lambda, which like a server, so which responds to HTTP events, then Quarkus or Micronaut are great, because they would convert the JSON HTTP event to JAX-RS to a HTTP endpoint, and this is the added value. And then I get on top of that, dependency injection for free. But if I use an asynchronous Lambda, which let's say reacts to S3 changes or listens to Kafka events or something like this, so there's no HTTP, there's nothing to do with Quarkus, so I could use Quarkus, but I don't have to. And in this particular case, I don't use dependency injection because I'm consuming the event. Then, usually if you have a SDK from AWS or from Asia, this is like a builder pattern. So if you don't need SDK and you would like to use your own class, I just do the new. And the new happens in constructor or in static initializer, and I'm basically done. So I'm with you, but in most of my projects, we need kind of server because we don't build server by ourselves like you did. So we just rely on nowadays mostly Quarkus, and this runs in container or on AWS. Docker container or AWS Lambdas, and then we get dependency injection for free. And with the dependency injection, we just use straight add inject. So no interfaces, no qualifiers, just add inject. You click on the field and you are in the class. So it's very simple, and developers just like it. It's very productive. So, but what I consider as a defect, to write an interface for every class, namely class impl, and hope that in one day we get a second class. This is just a waste of time and we have a powerful refactoring, so we can replace the class at any time with interface or whatever.
I fully agree with you on that. From time to time, you wish you had implemented an interface, but you can of course refactor that.
Yeah.
Something that regarding annotations, something that sometimes I find as a limitation is also happens with logging and the way people tend to use logging at the class level. So for example, when you see regular code, you see that people look for a logger and uses the class name for in order to log stuff related to that class. What happens in our systems is that the same class, imagine a server, we have 1,000 different servers, and we need to log differently because we reuse the same server for Visa, for MasterCard, for different cards or different links. So we introduced the notion of realms. So we have different realms, and we log. Our audit logging is related to a given realm, and that realm could be a test environment or a production environment, and may
like
have
stage, right?
Exactly. So I am not very. I don't like too much the line loggers. That logs every line. I'm more into logging a context of a transaction. In a single event, and that event is associated with a given realm. That realm is the one that gets actually logged.
But you could actually use dependency injection for it, because what we do with Logger, we wrote our own Logger. Not own Logger, this is wrong. We wrote a 3 lines wrapper, which wraps the system lang logger from JDK. And if you inject it with CDI, you get the injection point, and with the injection point, you get the metadata about where the logger gets injected. So you find, you will get the name of the class, the package, everything. So you can dynamically configure the logger. So what the developers only have to do, they say add inject log, and we can configure on the fly the logger that gets injected. And with Quarkus, there's no performance penalty. It is just bytecode. There's no reflection. There is performance penalty, but this is just pre-generated.
But you're talking about the same class, and I'm talking about instances of that class. So different instances of that class.
Yeah, we can do. We can have request scoped logger. So we could actually replace at every request the logger.
Perfect.
And depending on the environment, it could be configured completely differently.
We'll have to take a look at that.
Yeah. So you can inject a logger, and if it's request scoped, you get every request another instance. And if it's application scoped, there's one instance for everything, right? So you can decide, how often, how many instances of logger you get at the same time. So, but more interesting than dependency injection.
Sure.
What interests me, and maybe for our listeners also interesting, because you are the expert. So let's say I'm an ATM and I would like to debit $10. And or which currency do you have in Uruguay?
It's called Uruguayan pesos.
Pesos, Uruguayan pesos.
But
So
we have
I would like to
customers in over 100 countries. So
yeah, but let's Uruguayan pesos is perfect. So 10 Uruguayan pesos I would like to debit from ATM. Is there an ATM in Uruguay which with your system?
Yeah, well, actually, on the server side, yes. The server side of these transactions, when you swipe when you enter the card and goes to the switches and goes to Visa, it ends up going through actually more than one of our jPOS systems, because several banks use it, and the local acquirers also use it, and Visa also uses.
Is there a system where everything is from you? So from the client to the backend?
From the client, well, yes, in some branches that use cash registrars that connect to a jPOS, that connect to an acquirer, then connect to another acquirer, and that the other acquirer is also jPOS. We have several of those.
Let's take this. So, and I would like to know, if I debit 10 Uruguayan pesos, what happens exactly?
Well, the POS or the ATM will send a message.
But I swipe the card first, right?
You need to enter the card or swipe the card or read the chip in the card. But
are you already involved in this process? You get the ID for the PIN from the card, I guess, right?
Yes, we handle the PIN encryption and PIN. It happens. Many things happens because there's encryption at the card level in the card chip, but then there's also encryption on the PIN pad. The PIN pad sends an encrypted message to the acquirer, and the acquirer needs to translate that key into the key, the zone master key used with the card issuer. So there's a lot of encryption involved in the on the PIN side and also on the EMV side. But what happens?
We are talking about credit cards, right? Credit cards, right?
Credit, debit, store value cards, and also NFC and chip cards and all that.
So I swipe the card, or I'm in the near of the ATM machine, and then the card sends hello to the machine.
It sends a single message. Imagine a POS. It's easier because the ATM is actually a dumb terminal. So there's a driver for that ATM that sends you to the screen one, and it's basically a remote state machine. Depending on the screen that you are, you press the letter A, the button for letter A, and it sends a message to the server that says, "Hey, the user pressed A. What's the next screen?" And it's the server sends a message with the next screen. It's very dumb, very old 80s from the 80s protocol. With the POS, what happens is that you swipe the card or you enter the card, and the POS sends a message that in ISO 8583 is a 200 message, and that message has the information for the amount of the transaction, the terminal ID, merchant ID, the card. If you swipe the card, it sends a field with the track 2 data and track 1 data. The track 1 has your name, the track 2 has your card number. Same information goes in a chip, and it sends the message to an acquirer. The acquirer, they can use or not jPOS, receives that message, does some validations related to the terminal, because that's the acquirer is the one that has the commercial relationship with the POS, with the merchant. They give you the POS. That they do some validations, some velocity checks and risk management and things like that, and then sends the transaction, the same message. It sends it to the card issuer. So with an authorization. Sometimes it sends a 200 message if it is a debit, if you're at an ATM or you're taking that money, or otherwise it sends 100 message that is an authorization request. That's when your bank puts a hold in your account for, say, $100. Then at the end of the day, some stuff happens again because the terminals does a settlement against the acquirer, and the acquirer does settlement against the issuer in order to do clearing. So there's a lot of it's actually magic. When you swipe a card and you see an approval, it's magic because there's a lot of things that can go wrong. Many networks. I always keep cash just in case.
Yeah, approval is magic and rejection is annoying, right? This is
It's annoying, and it can happen. It can happen because it jumps for. It's very brittle systems all the way.
What are the latency requirements? I think it has to happen fast, otherwise you get timeouts, right?
Yes, usually the latency is it's about 5 seconds.
Okay.
The requirement, but you usually get approvals in 200 milliseconds or something like that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In jPOS, we have quite less. We can handle about 4,000 TPS on a single node, sustained load. So, and that's a lot. 1,000 TPS is a lot. Most countries.
On which JDK you tested this? On which Java?
Java 8. That's in Java 8. But now we are working. Actually, that's what keeps the project exciting. I'm moving the transaction manager. The transaction manager in jPOS is the thing that handles the load for different systems. We need to make sure that, for example, if one link goes down, we can keep threads. In the past, we needed to use thread pools and things like that in order to make a predictable handling of transactions. Right now, we are starting to work with Project Loom and see how things actually change, because what happens when we receive a transaction, we have different participants or little pieces of the transaction to validate the message, validate the terminal, merchant, etc. But at some point, we need to make a remote request. When we make a remote request, we can't lock that thread, because if we want to handle 4,000 TPS, we want to release that thread so that it
park, right?
Stops, it parks, exactly. So we need to make all that in using what we call continuations. We pause a transaction, and then the transaction goes back to the queue once we get the response back. With Project Loom, we may not need that, and that's very exciting. The code will be much easier to implement without the continuations.
How big is the transaction server? So how many lines of code do you have, roughly?
In the transaction manager?
Yeah.
Or the whole jPOS?
The whole jPOS and transaction manager. Just interesting.
Okay.
Roughly.
Let me clock that. jPOS is about 100K lines of code. With jPOS, EE has another 100K. Then JCard has about 75,000 K. But let me confirm you the transaction manager. It's not very large. Transaction manager. It's 1,000 lines of code.
1,000?
1,000, yes.
Okay, this is actually tiny, right?
Yes, it's tiny, but it's very interesting how you can combine the same set of transaction participants. A participant is a tiny module, a tiny class that has a very simple API that implements a two-phase commit protocol.
Okay.
So, because something that happens very often is, imagine that you need to prepay a cell phone card. So you need to top up a cell phone, and you need to authorize a transaction for that. So you need to connect to two servers. One to get the credit for the transaction, to get the authorization. Say you are going to put 100 pesos in your phone, in your cell phone bill. You get the authorization for the card, and then you need to call the top-up application. That can fail. And if the transaction fails, we use this two-phase commit protocol in order to abort the previous authorization.
But the two-phase commit can have, heuristic errors, right? So, I mean, it is not 100% safe. So it is a bit tricky to do it right.
It's a bit tricky to do it right. The JVM can crash, and we store checkpoints in disk. We use the BerkeleyDB, the Oracle BerkeleyDB, in order to store checkpoints, so that when you restart your system, you have chances, if the system didn't completely die, that you can recover from that transaction.
Very good, because in application servers, what sometimes happened, so they ran two-phase commit, but the server was not configured to write the persistent logs, the transaction logs, and if the server died and then restarted, it forgot what happened, and the transaction was still going. So we get deadlocks because the database was already locked, so the table, and we couldn't just start a new transaction. So it's interesting.
I think I heard.
It's crazy.
I heard that recent podcast. You mentioned that issue, and I was hearing your conversation and thinking about exactly that we store that in BerkeleyDB. In the past, we used JDBM. I don't know if you remember the project called JDBM. Now we use BerkeleyDB, and it works great.
What's interesting is Belaban is also working on it, because he's working JGroup's Raft, and he experiments with Raft and RocksDB, and RocksDB is also similar to BerkeleyDB. BerkeleyDB was actually open source, and it was acquired by Oracle, right?
Sure.
Or acquired. I mean, it was used and repackaged
But it's still open source, and I think it works. It works fine.
And what I wanted to the exceptions, because if you deal with two-phase commit, there are interesting exceptions. For instance, my favorite is heuristic hazard. This is XA heuristic hazard. The transaction branch may have been heuristically completed. Or you get heuristic mix. The transaction branch have been heuristically committed and rolled back. So I think the worst what can happen is if one of the participants, they don't answer, and you are assuming, okay, they committed or they rolled back, but you don't know. So I would say in distributed systems, when nothing happens, this is I think the worst case, right? Because if external system doesn't answer, you cannot know whether it is still operating or is completely dead, right?
Well, in that case, the ISO 8583 protocol is quite solid. Solid, because if you don't get when you send an authorization request, if you don't get a response, or you don't get a response in time, you send a reversal always. So it's the POS device that will reverse the transaction.
Okay, that's better, because you get opinionated two-phase commit, right? So it is not completely open. You know what the error cases are better defined than in the two-phase commit case.
Yes, and actually the transaction participants needs to return if they are either prepared or if they need to abort the transaction, and they also have a timeout. But the timeout is tricky. In Java, you can't interrupt a thread. So
yeah,
it is assumed that you will return. Your participant needs to return, and if it doesn't return, it creates. It's detected very early in the development cycle because it fails, and it drastically fails because that session of the transaction manager will be locked forever, and it's always fires all kind of flags and bells. So we don't have that kind of problem. The transaction participants need to be implemented in a way that returns in time within their SLAs, and they run in the same JVM. So it's.
You already mentioned continuations, so I assume you also played with reactive programming, right? A bit.
Correct.
Or at least you look at the principles. So are you using any reactive programming framework inside the transaction manager system, or?
No, actually, we implemented our own, and in the servers we don't have a requirement for a large number of sessions of socket sessions, because these kind of links usually set a single socket connection and send many messages through that same socket. So you send the transactions, and the responses may come back in a different order, because if you send, for example, a Visa transaction and a MasterCard transaction, the authorizations may come in reverse order over that same socket. But this is a single socket, so we don't need to use reactive programming in that. I used Java Neo in some large merchants that have 50,000 cash registers connecting to the same system. In that system, I had to implement a specific server for using the Java Neo new input output.
NIO,
I don't know if
you mean, right?
NIO, exactly.
NIO. Okay. We always had, for instance, Grizzly was one of the first, I don't know whether you remember HTTP servers from Grizzly, so Java.NET Grizzly project. The Glassfish was based on Grizzly. And this was the first NIO server, because what they could do, the long polling or Comet protocol, without blocking the threads. So the entire deal was, if the thread blocked, they parked the thread. And then they can save resources. So I actually used that 2010, I think, in some projects, and we could have a huge amount of waiting connections without any impact on memory or CPU, or not measurable impact or significant impact. Let's put it this way, on the CPU or on memory. So what's funny, because in some trivial enterprise projects where we have 3 microservices, no requirements regarding latency. Developers, it was interesting, in one project they wanted to use reactive programming, and then it became that complex. So actually it was trivial, but they made it complex by introducing a framework. So at the end, no one knew what's going on. So there was performance problems, and what they did, they called 5 endpoints, and in the end they just waited. So the entire situation was just pointless. So what? Sure. And what I like your approach, that you try to identify the problem first and ask yourself, will reactive programming help me or not? If it helps, maybe I use it. If not, I won't use it. And this is what I like, because it makes it maintainable. After a few years, you will forget actually why you introduced reactive programming in the first place. And then you say, okay, I don't see the point, but you will be afraid to remove it, because you say, okay, maybe there was some secret idea or a secret problem which I solved with the framework. What I sometimes use is right now is completable future, for instance, is built in Java, so this is helpful for specific things. And what I'm curious is Project Loom and structured concurrency. This could, I think, help you later if it's come out, right?
Sure, absolutely. Actually, I'm already playing with the Project Loom, in particular with the transaction manager, because the transaction manager has a number of sessions that you establish. And for example, you say you want to process, depending on your CPU and the number of CPUs, you say you want to have 32 sessions of the transaction manager. And then you can have a max sessions. For example, if you, for some reason, you have some kind of spike or something, you can go up to 128, and the system creates new threads for you. And once the load goes down, it goes back to 32 or 116 sessions.
Sounds for me like EJB back then, max pool and min pool.
Exactly. We have that kind of stuff. With Project Loom, we don't need to reuse any kind of thread. We can create a new thread, a new virtual thread for every new transaction. You still have to take care of your concurrency with your database, because sometimes as part of your business logic, you need a JDBC connection, and perhaps you need to spawn that JDBC connection over several participants, and that may take some time. And perhaps you can have more than 100 simultaneous. Your thread, your JDBC pool may be 100 sessions or 500 sessions, but you need to control that. So you can't create new virtual threads just because they are cheap and you can handle a huge load. You need to control that, and the transaction manager is good for that.
This is actually a very good point, because in my application servers or microprofile runtime projects, what we usually did, we said, okay, we have, let's say, 100 whatever, let's say EJBs, or it can be whatever you like. So if you allow to have 100 EJB instances, you knew exactly there will be never more than 100 parallel threads. So, and this is like execution channels. So what it meant is that if you access the database, we said, okay, at most there will be 100 parallel connections to database. So we said, okay, it could be less, but if you configure the connection pool to database with 100 connections, you get the max throughput. With Loom, you can have millions of threads. And now it's not the challenge, what do we do with the connection pool to database, right? With the traditional database, because multiple threads could access the same connection, which means you have to be really careful that all the virtual threads are coming from one real request. Because if the virtual threads come from different requests, the database becomes inconsistent, actually.
Sure. We have the same problem that we have with databases. We have it with HSMs, with hardware security modules. That usually the HSMs are usually licensed on a per load basis. So you have an HSM that has, say, 10 TPS. It's much cheaper than one that supports 1,000 TPS. It's the same hardware, but depending on the license that you have, you can inject more load on that HSM. So we need to pull all those, and the transaction manager is good for that as well, because you can have different transaction managers with different sessions and max sessions configuration and different timeouts and max timeouts for the whole transaction. And we had to implement all that kind of. I think it's problems probably different than most REST APIs and REST servers kind of problems. This is the kind of
similar. I mean, maybe your sockets connection are more long running, but if we get a lot of HTTP connections, and usually our apps, if you hit the database, we have also longer running HTTP connections, because if the connection runs for 2 seconds, there's still a time 2 seconds. So we block our threads for 2 seconds. So we have similar problems. What's in which environment your system, your jPOS is running? So mostly on Docker containers or bare metal? So what is the usual or most popular environment?
Well, it depends on when because everybody's moving to the clouds and moving to Docker and moving to Kubernetes and moving to cloud to different clouds But in the past, these kind of systems run on our customers' data centers, mostly for PCI compliance. Because when the cloud was something new, PCI wouldn't allow you to run on the cloud until recently. So people are moving to the cloud. We have many customers, large customers with 600 jPOS stacks running in the cloud, and some uses Kubernetes, and some others use just Docker containers. But the thing is that imagine that with a single node you can have a 1,000, 2,000, 4,000 TPS. So and 4,000 TPS is a lot for these kind of transactions. An ISO 8583 message is about 150 or 200 bytes. It's very small. So you don't need a huge system to run jPOS.
What's your take on Kubernetes? I mean, because if you're, or maybe we do it later, but you mentioned PCI and security. What's happened to me last 2 years, we had to use cloud because of security. What the interesting part was that because we had an API in the cloud, it was easier, to encrypt, to rotate the certificates, to have compliance than on data center or in headquarters. So it's at least on paper, and paper is most important because compliance is a paper, right? So clouds are actually more secure than a data center, right?
Sure, but the thing is that until recently, the HSMs for PIN related encryption were not available. So you had to still use on-premises and a hybrid cloud with some stuff running on-premises and some other in the cloud. So what happens with our old customers? We have customers for 20 years or more years, and they are moving to the cloud. So this is the trend we are seeing, and they're moving faster and accelerating. And there are offerings for cloud HSMs. Actually, we work with a couple companies offering HSMs on the cloud and PCI compliance. But the problem is that the auditors are probably late to this trend. So the QSAs are sometimes not happy with. It's more difficult to audit to get a PCI certification for a fully cloud based system. This is changing super fast, and I think that everybody will run on the cloud. We deliver Docker containers, and it's the DevOps team, the operations team. This is not I argue that the DevOps term. Sometimes the devs are the devs and the ops are the ops, and not all the time what you call DevOps actually develop and program, and so the operations.
You are right. It really depends on the project. So DevOps it's call it DevOps is marketing term, and in projects,
absolutely. For me, it's the administrators or the system operators. Take the containers, and we usually provide a Docker Compose where they can run everything, and then they can decide how to deploy that.
I have a suggestion because it's an interesting conversation. So I would like to invite you back again to talk about jPOS Cloud, for instance, because it's an interesting topic, which options they are. It's also what interests me. And we can, just because you use Docker Compose, we have a chat about Fargate, serverless, and Kubernetes, and the cloud. And and maybe also you have more, tests with Loom, which also interests me. What are, the results of your investigations with Project Loom? So
far, I'm really happy with the tests that that I'm doing, and I will release a new version of jPOS. It's jPOS 3.0.
When it happens, roughly?
Well, the branch already exists. It's jPOS next branch, and it will happen probably this year. And
Okay.
you know, the nice thing about open source is it's ready when it's ready. So we don't have
perfect.
but we are working in that. I'm also very interested in using the same deconstructing the transaction participants that right now run in a single node and spread them over eventually an environment where you could run, for example, using Istio. Because some of the problems that we solve with the transaction manager, you know, that kind of circuit breaking and A/B testing and things like that, could be distributed using Istio or eventually cloud native solutions for different vendors. I really have to tell you that I've been following your podcast, and I fully agree with your mindset of using whatever the cloud provider has in terms of offerings without using open source solutions. My open source heart drives me to use things that are fully open source, like Kafka or Istio or things like that. But I have to admit that you are right in your way of seeing the cloud and using whatever the provider does. I just don't like when things are closed source, but that's a reality, and it's a trade-off.
I conclude with an example. For instance, in recent projects, we use Kafka. And if you provision Kafka in the cloud, there is a serverless option or not serverless option. And if you pick the not serverless option, you have in advance, pick the hardware. And even Raspberry Pi, like broker, is somehow expensive. And the serverless option is cheaper at the beginning, but is getting, to be more expensive over time. And it is not as well integrated because, it is open source, but it came after, the cloud was formed, right? So it is still, from the cloud perspective, is a third party, even open third party product. And what most of the cloud providers are doing, they're their own solution, which they need, internally. So to give you an example, if you like to use Kafka, you will have to wait in the non-serverless mode, I would say 10 minutes to 40 minutes, or usually half an hour, until the entire cluster is formed. And then you have just the cluster. Then you have to use no different API to create the queues. But if you use, let's say, Kinesis on Amazon, you just give me a topic. And after a second, you have the topic, costs you nothing. There is no thinking about the clusters and whatever, and then you send the message and you get charged per message. So I would say the entire philosophy in the cloud is different, I would say, and you only have to follow your vision. So either you say, I ignore the cloud completely and I use the cloud as a Docker container runtime or virtual machine, and I use nothing from the cloud. This is one viable strategy, but it becomes expensive. Or you can say, I just use whatever the cloud provides, but then open source doesn't make any sense because you are completely dependent on the cloud. And whether you use open source or not, no one cares. But I would like to have the chat with you, a little bit later this year, so we can also have a chat about Project Room, and would be interesting discussion, right?
Excellent. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Where people can hire or buy jPOS from you, this is the most interesting, because jpos.org, I think, right? This is the official website, jpos.org.
Yes, jpos.org is the open source project. Transactility.com is the company.
Okay.
And I have my DMs open in Twitter. The handle is APR.
APR.
Mm-hmm. APR.
And when people should hire you, if they start with open source, what's your advice? I mean, right away to get started. This is usually what happens with me as a consultant. Is okay, help us at the beginning, and then let's see, right? So this is and what's do you have any preferences or advice?
What we provide is basically hand-holding for a project. If somebody is going to use jPOS for a project, it makes sense to have we provide trainings, we provide a reference implementation. You can use jPOS to create a card issuing platform, but you can use our reference implementation of our card issuing platform, and that drives you, a 1 year project goes down to a couple of months because you're starting off a running system with all the little details already implemented. So that's a kind of
like a template, right? So you say, okay, this is like solution.
Yes, we have reference implementation for acquirers and card issuers, and we have very large card issuers running jPOS with over 1 billion cards on file for a long time. So they are production ready and very successful fintech companies and banks, etc., using already. So it makes no sense to reinvent the wheel. Mm-hmm. That's what we are doing for 20 years. We are reinventing the wheel for 20 years. So no need for our customers to do that.
And what I also told to my clients, so if they used to know Whitefly back then or Glassfish, it was Sun Microsystems, I say, just buy the support because we don't have, time to fiddle with the source code. So, they build the stuff. So if you get direct support, it's okay. But if this company becomes, too large and you have to talk with people who have no idea about, the actual software, this becomes, a little bit ridiculous. But in your case, I assume you get, support from people who actually know about the software, right? From you or your colleagues, which know the source code actually.
Sure. We have a community of over 2,000 jPOS developers in the mailing list, and we have our company has about 40 people right now. All of them are have used jPOS for 10 years, 15 years, or things like that.
How many of them are committers, jPOS committers from your company?
Well, most are committers, yeah, and we have over 100 or something like that committers.
And they would also help someone with support questions, right? So if they contact your company, they get response from committers more likely, or yeah.
Yes, and it scales very fast into a committer or even myself if the problem can be solved. But you don't have to hire our services. People don't have to hire. We answer on Stack Overflow. If you put something on jPOS in Stack Overflow, in 2 minutes you get an answer. I'm competing with one of our committers, and he always win answering the question faster than I.
Why I'm asking who answers the question, so I have to tell you the last story. It's just funny. It was a task force. We spent weeks, to hunt down a bug, which was actually a transactional bug in host and application server. So there was a mainframe and application server, and because of back in the operating system, we had some trouble on application servers, and we found the bug. We wanted, to patch it, but we couldn't because it was an open source application server. And we knew the bug, we decompiled the code, but we were not allowed to patch the code. So we had to wait until the consultant arrives. And the consultant from the company, he was very, very busy, and we waited for him. Everyone was tired because we spent, nights trying to fix the problem. And then his question was, the first question is, okay, I maybe I know, what's the problem is. And then he asked, it was like, a task force room, and he asked, have you ever considered, I don't know whether you know, he asked us, there is a -xmx parameter. It's like, yes. Have you considered to increase it? It's like, are you serious now? It's like, we are working for 3 weeks on source code. It's like, yeah, I think you don't have enough memory. It's like, yeah, of course, we consider this the entire time, right? And then he answered, okay, then he has no idea. what the problem could be. And then, the project manager say, okay, we immediately, cancel the support contract because it is impossible. So this is why I ask, whether you get, a direct line to people who actually committers or really know the system, right? Because this is the added value of support. Otherwise, if you get, I always get the levels backwards. It's like, first level, second level, third level. But what I really like, if there's escalation, I would like to talk to people who actually build the system or know the system, because then you can really save time, right?
Sure. We have, for example, a free jPOS Slack, and there are about 1,000 people there. Most of them are using jPOS, and I'm all the time. I'm sleeping and checking my phone. If there's a question, and I will answer. But I'm usually late answering because there's people more fanatic than I and answer before. So
you are young. You're just playing, with all the phones and all the electronics. I'm deactivating everything, so I have to focus on work. But you are a young guy. You are surrounded with messages.
I've been online since the old BBS days.
We had to. Okay, perfect. Thank you a lot. It was a pleasure again, and I'm already looking forward to the next discussion. Virtual threads, looms, and clouds, and jPOS, of course.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.